Chapter 4. Dickon. The sun had already risen in a pink mackerel sky when the terrier returned, caked in grey dust from the tips of his whiskers to the end of his tail. Flopping on his side by Pip, who was still peering out from the opening under the fallen door, he rested his head by her paws and panted, with his tongue hanging out of the corner of his mouth. All night, Pip hadn't taken her eyes off him as he tirelessly searched through the ruins of Bloomsbury Street. The din of panic had subsided now, and the road was quiet, as if it was resting from the trauma of the hours before. Dotted around the rubble, the air raid wardens talked quietly among themselves, sipping tea from white mugs between bites of fresh sandwiches cut into triangles. The tall man, wearing black-rimmed spectacles, stood by a camouflage green van with WVS printed on its bonnet, which was parked at the side of the road. A woman leaned out through a large hatch cut into the van's side. Taking a handful of bread from her, the tall man turned away and approached Dickon in broad strides. "There you go, boy, you deserve this," he said, placing the food by the terrier's head and affectionately rubbing between his ears. Pip darted back under the door and hid in the shadows of the umbrella. Giving the bread a sniff, Dickon turned flat on his stomach and wolfed it down where he lay. "Stay here and rest," the man said, walking to the other air raid men and women once more. "That was quite a shift for the both of us." "Help yourself, love," the terrier said, nudging the last mouthful of food under the fallen door with a wag of his tail. "You must be hungry if you ain't slept all night." "Where are my mamma and papa?" Pip said, not giving the bread a glance. Dickon's tail fell limp. Her brow, furrowed with hope, was a look he saw every time the bombs fell. Those lost, longing faces broke his heart. "I hate to be the one to tell you this," he said, gently shaking his head. "But if we could have, we would have found him by now. It's time I took you somewhere where you'll be well looked after now." "I can't leave. Mama and Papa always come back. I have to wait for them. They would never leave me." "I'm sorry, love, but don't you reckon they'd have found you by now? We ain't moved all night, and look around you." Pip's eyes followed his, sombrely falling on newly organised piles of rubble and skeletons of buildings pummeled into unnatural, jagged shapes by the bomb blast. "Most of this site's been cleared. If they were trapped under what little there is left of this place, they'd have climbed out and found you." "But they have to find me," Pip whimpered. "They're in a place they can't come back from." Dickon paused, and his gruff voice cracked with sadness, his scuffy head between his paws. "They're dead." Pip suddenly felt so unsteady on her legs that a soft breeze could have carried her away. How could they be dead when she had just been curled up beside them in their nest, resting her ears on Mamma's chest and listening to her heartbeat? It was impossible to think she would never see them again. "No," said Pip, standing tall and defiant on her hind paws. "I don't believe you. If you're not going to find them, then I will." She dashed from under the fallen door to the solitary front step where James Smith & Son's umbrellas had stood, too devastated to care about being seen by the humans standing on the other side of the street. "Now, Pip," Dickon said urgently, leaping up to follow her, "there ain't any need to look over there." Pip quickened her pace, determined to search under every crushed brick and splintered piece of wood, whether the dog liked it or not. But as she neared the step, her throat tightened with sorrow. A sheer drop lay before her, and she looked down into the deep, dark, jagged mouth of a crater which had replaced the welcoming shop floor where she had last seen Mamma and Papa sleeping inside their umbrella. "It was a direct hit, love," Dickon said softly, peering into the ruins behind her. "It's a miracle you made it out alive." Pip couldn't speak. Mamma and Papa moved fast and could squeeze through the tiniest of spaces. She'd never seen anything that they couldn't hop and climb over. She looked at the remains of the umbrella shop, and a sick feeling of despair choked her breath. Crawling out of the mangled bricks, wood and glass wouldn't have posed a problem for them. Turning away, her eyes rested on a pool of dried blood on the pavement, still outlining the shape of where a human body had lain. Mr. and Mrs. Smith must be dead too, and poor Peter, fighting the war in France, would have no idea. It was then that a tremor of regret shook her chest. Before they had gone to bed inside their nest, she had been so mean to Papa. She would do anything to go back and say she was sorry, tell him she loved him, listen to his history stories and rest her head on Mamma's shoulder one last time. Drawing a long, shuddering breath, a terrible, painful loneliness she had never felt before gripped her heart. "I know it's hard, love," Dickens said, with a kind nudge of his scruffy head. "Come on, let's get you back to your umbrella where it's safe. They may be dopey with no sleep, but we can't risk humans catching sight of you. They're a jumpy bunch when they see little uns like you. Loony behaviour, if you ask me. Here," he said, throwing her up on his snout with his cold, wet nose. She flopped on it, feeling paralysed by grief. "You must be tired as a bee after everything you've been through." Reaching the umbrella, he shuffled his head under the fallen door with his tail in the air. Sliding from his nose, Pip crawled into a little ball beside it, with tears soaking her furry cheeks. "This bleeding war took my family from me too," the dog continued, softly lying on his stomach and resting his head next to her with a whimper of sympathy. Pip quietly listened, feeling comforted by his deep, gruff voice. "It weren't a big one, just my Jack and his mum since Pa went off to war, but I'd have done anything for 'em. We were so happy until we found out that Jack had to move to the countryside where the kids would be safer. The East End of London was in a bit of strife, you see. Even with the blackouts every night, Hitler's bombers found us because of the Thames shining in the moonlight, and there ain't no point in bombing a field of potatoes now, is there? In the end, Jack's mum arranged for us all to go," Dickin continued. "She quit her factory job and called her Auntie Dora in Cornwall. We'd have to pull our weight on the farm, she said, but we'd get a roof over our heads and maybe a fresh egg or two, when you can't get many of them in London these days, mate. That evening I lay in my kennel with that fluttery feeling in my stomach, thinking of all them rabbits I was going to chase, maybe even a sheep or two if I was lucky. But then something stopped my daydreaming. A bleeding fox was nosing around our cabbages. There's nothing I like more than chasing one of them out of the garden, and I gave it the run of its life, snapping at its heels all the way into Vicky Park. Then, out of nowhere, something strange tickled me whiskers like a thunderstorm was coming. Suddenly, moaning Minnie's siren started wailing, and what a terrible feeling shook inside me. I wasn't with Jack or his mum to get 'em into the Anderson shelter. I'd left 'em back at the house asleep in their beds. A sound like an angry beehive started filling the sky, and a minute later the great crashing started. I sprinted home faster than I've ever run before. There weren't a star or a moon in the sky, just a red glow above London, like it was bleeding. All I could see was flames and smoke. Humans ran around shouting for help, screaming for water, and all the streets I knew were gone. When I found my house, it was too late. All that was left was a big pile of bricks. I couldn't hear my Jack and our mum with them bombs banging all about the place, but nothing stops my nose. That's when I dug up his specs, all cracked and bent and sticky like they'd been dipped in red treacle. The next day, men came and took their bodies away in one of them green ambulance vans. They drove away without giving me a second glance, and I chased till my legs gave way and I fell in the street trying to breathe. I went back to where I found Jack's specs and lay next to him, still smelling my Jack and our mum, but I knew they'd never come home. Then one day, a lump of bread rolled across the ground by my paws. A man wearing one of them metal hats crouched next to me with a sandwich in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. "So much for the phony war, eh?" he said, throwing me another bit of crust, but I was too sad to eat. "Not hungry?" he said, scratching that sweet spot behind my ears so's. I could stop my legs scratching the ground. Nor me, pal. Before me stood a bloke, tall and lanky with black rimmed specs, just like my Jack. He came every day to clear the mess from my street with other wardens, and I grew fond of him. On his last day he asked me to go home with him. There ain't nothing left for us here now, boy, he said, and he was right. You see, love, that was the end of my last life, but my new one ain't bad, and I bet yours will be all right too. Mr. King and me are family now. He looks out for me and I look out for him. I couldn't save my Jack or his mum, and Mr. King couldn't save his family neither. So what I'm saying is that there's lots of us like you. We're all in it together, and it's something like this that brings us all closer. You'll see it too, mate, I promise you. And I'm sure your folks would want you to be safe. It's time for you to start your new life now, just like I did. I won't leave the umbrella, Pip snapped, locking eyes with the terrier as her hackles rose. She glowered desperately, hoping her fury would squash her sorrow. My family has never been without it. I will not leave it here. It's all right, Dickens said softly. Don't worry, we can take it with us. But we have to leave this place. Have you got any other friends or family I can take you to? Pip looked at where James Smith and Sons used to be. Trembling, she cast her eyes on the pub next door where Dot and Joe had lived. Nothing was left of it either. I don't have anyone, she said. Everyone I knew was here, and now they're all... It's all right, mate, don't you worry, Dickens said. There's a place for folks like you. It's called St. Giles. I've heard of St. Giles. She remembered Mama and Papa had grimaced whenever they heard the name. It's full of beggars and thieves. I wouldn't take you there if it weren't safe. St. Giles is the place you go when you ain't got no place to go. And in wartime, that ain't something to sniff at. Pip looked at the umbrella and thought of Mama and Papa. They would have hated it if they ended up there. There had to be another place. Wait, she said, and at once her whiskers popped upright with an idea. I know where I'm meant to go. Good, where is it? I'll take you there. I'm going to the Umbrella Museum in Gignes. It's right in the north of Italy. Italy? Dickens scoffed. You must be crackers, even after the Allied invasion of the south. Northern Italy is still enemy territory. But I have nowhere else to go, Pip said, fighting the tears swimming in her eyes. I am the last surviving Hanway mouse of Bloomsbury Street, but my mother is from Gignes. I have family there. We were going to visit them when Mr. and Mrs. Smith took the umbrella to show the owners of the museum. It belonged to Jonas Hanway. Pip's voice cracked. She could almost hear Papa telling her about her family and the umbrella where she and her ancestors had lived for over 100 years. He was the first man to use an umbrella in England. Before him, people had to get horse-drawn carriages when it rained. I come from a long line of umbrella mice, and my umbrella belongs to the museum. I have to take it with me. That's fair enough, mate, but how are you planning on getting there? There's crossing the English Channel, and there's travelling across Europe, which is at war, in case you hadn't noticed. The terrier shook his head. No offence, Pip, but you're one little mouse. I'd sooner see Winston Churchill put on a dress and dance in the fountains at Trafalgar Square. All we ever wanted to do was go to Gignes and meet my mother's family and see where she grew up. A place in the Italian hills that's fitted with important umbrellas far away from the bombs in London. And her voice faltered, and, furious with grief, she clenched her paws into fists, stared into Dickens' flabbergasted face, and cried out in a crescendo, "Wouldn't you do anything to go to the place where you had some family left, where you know you are meant to be? I don't know how I'll get there, but I'll never know unless I try. I just need to find the courage in my heart to begin something new." On uttering the same words Mama always used to say when she was struggling, Pip realised she would never hear her or Papa's voices again. She would never tickle her whiskers together with theirs and see them smile. She would never rest her ears on Mama's soft, furry chest and listen to her heartbeat before she went to sleep. No longer able to fight the sadness bellowing in her heart, tears raced down Pip's cheeks and travelled the length of her whiskers before hitting the ground in small thuds. Dickon fell silent. He had to admit there was truth in what Pip said. He'd do anything and everything to be near his family again. All he had left of them was their gravestones in a poplar churchyard, and he let nothing stop him from going there whenever he could. "Well," he said with a sigh, "you can't do it on your own, that's for sure. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I know someone that could help you." "What?" Pip gasped, looking up. "Who?" "I'll tell you on the way," the terrier said, energetically wagging his tail. "Climb up and grab hold of me collar. I'm going to help you find 'em." "Really?" "Yes, and it's time we got to move on. We've been here long enough," he said, dipping his head and shoulders to the ground. "Come on, love, this ain't time for dilly-dallying." With a lump in her throat, Pip nervously clutched Dickon's black, wiry fur in both paws and clambered up to the back of his neck. "Now you hold on tight, Pip Hanway," he said in a muffled voice as he took the umbrella between his teeth. "This is going to be the run of your life."